Good day, everyone. For Telesur, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with a developing story in Pakistan, where the Pakistani Taliban have seized a military-run school in the Peshawar province. Some 500 students and teachers were in the school when armed men stormed in. At least 130 people have been killed. At least 84 children are among the victims. Pakistani authorities surrounding the school have so far killed 6 Taliban militants. The extremists claim that they have taken the school in retaliation for the army's attack on one of their strongholds. This is a breaking story. Continue to check our website for the latest. In Latin America, we turn to Mexico with our continual coverage of the 43 students abducted in the state of Guerrero in September. Families of the missing students delivered a litany of demands to Mexican senators on Monday, calling for their loved ones to be found alive. They also call for local elections in Guerrero to be canceled until the disappeared youth are returned. Now, over the weekend, Mexican senators condemned aggressions by Mexican law enforcement officers against those protesting. Recent reports by independent media indicate that the Mexican federal government may have played a greater role in the abduction of the students than previously thought. And in Colombia, 12 victims of the nation's armed conflict have arrived in Havana, Cuba to participate in the peace talks between the Colombian government and the FARC guerrillas. The arrival of the delegates marks an important step forward for the peace talks, which suffered a short setback in November. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos suspended the dialogue following the FARC's capture of General Rubén Darío Alzate. Darío Alzate's subsequent release led to a reinitiation of the latest and final round of the talks. And we now go to Bogota, Colombia, where our correspondent Charles Parkinson has more on the final round of the talks.
The fifth and final victims group is taking part in Colombia's peace talks in Havana today, marking the end of a historic element of these negotiations, with victims never previously being offered a space to take part in talks designed to end an internal conflict. Now, despite the victims coming from a wide range of backgrounds and having suffered at the hands of either the state, the paramilitaries or the guerrillas, or in some cases 2 or all 3 of those actors, the almost universal message coming from the victims is of support for the peace talks and a desire for reconciliation and an end to the conflict. Now, this cycle of peace talks comes to an end tomorrow, and the negotiations are not expected to get back underway again until next year. So we can hope that early in the new year, using the testimonies of these 5 groups, the government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia can come to a meaningful agreement on how to deal with the more than 6 million victims generated by Colombia's internal conflict. Charles Parkinson in Bogota, Colombia.
Thanks to Charles. We now go to Argentina, where the Mercosur summit kicks off on Tuesday. Foreign ministers from the Mercosur member countries have gathered in Paraná for the meeting. One of the most important issues to be discussed is the entry of Bolivia into the bloc of countries. The Mercosur bloc currently includes Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, representing more than 275 million people and a combined GDP of nearly $3.5 trillion. For an update on the Mercosur meetings, we go to our correspondent in Argentina, Leonel Poblete.
Yes, hello, Cody. Warm welcome to you and all our viewers of Telesur to Paraná, the capital city of Entre Rios, located 470 kilometers north of Buenos Aires. We're here because the 47th summit of the Mercosur is being held here in Paraná this week. Today, just in a couple of hours' time, the summit of the foreign affairs ministers will be gathering. It's a prelude to what will be happening here tomorrow, which is the meeting of heads of state such as Cristina Fernandez, of course, here from Argentina, Dilma Rousseff, Tabaré Vázquez, the president-elect of Uruguay, and of course Evo Morales will be coming here, amongst others, to the city of Paraná. The 2 central issues, according to many here at the 47th summit of the Mercosur in Paraná, will be, of course, Bolivia's addition as a permanent member to Mercosur and sovereign debt restructuring. Of course, the vulture funds issue will be heavily debated here at this summit. Cody.
Thanks to Leo. Here in Venezuela, the U.S. government plans to pass new sanctions on Venezuela, alleging human rights violations. Ironically, it comes following a Senate report revealing a list of torture techniques used by U.S. forces following the September 11th attacks. Here's Rachel Boothroyd with more.
It's less than a week after a damning report was published documenting the CIA's extreme torture methods against detainees in Afghanistan. But US President Barack Obama looks set to sign a bill passed by Congress sanctioning the Venezuelan government for human rights abuses. It's an irony not lost on Venezuelans.
In my opinion, they can do whatever they want. The Senate, even President Obama. But I think they need to start looking at improving their own democracy.
The sanctions are said to be in response to the Venezuelan government's alleged repression of protesters during the wave of violence which erupted in the country in February this year. Yet the vast majority of the 44 people who died during the unrest were killed at the hands of violent protesters, who barricaded streets in response to calls from US-funded right-wing politicians Leopoldo López and Maria Corina Machado to oust the Venezuelan government. If approved, the sanctions would impose visa bans on a number of Venezuelan officials, as well as freeze any assets that they have in the United States. For many, the move is symbolic of the increasingly hostile but ever more irrelevant position of the US in world politics.
I think that these types of things are starting to fall apart by themselves. You know, the whole world is disgusted with this attitude and the impositions of imperialism.
According to economist Pablo Jimenez, it's possible that the bill could lead to further sanctions. But with over 100 million barrels of Venezuelan oil making their way to the US on a daily basis, he says it looks unlikely.
We in Venezuela won't be the ones to be most damaged by any process of erosion in the US-Venezuela commercial relations.
Yet there are other ways for the US government to exert pressure on Venezuela. The bill also lays the groundwork for increasing funding to anti-government groups through US agencies such as USAID, which have transferred more than $100 million to such groups in the past 14 years.
Every time that the US has implemented these kinds of sanctions, there is an immediate wave of violence unleashed against the country or countries involved, in this case, Venezuela.
Whilst it's yet to be seen if the bill will be signed into law by Obama, many are interpreting the sanctions as representative of an increasingly aggressive and interventionist US stance towards the Venezuelan government. Rachel Boothroyd for Telesur in Caracas, Venezuela.
And thanks to Rachel. Now we go to Ecuador, where Colombian and Ecuadorian officials gathered for a binational cabinet meeting Monday. As our correspondent in Ecuador, Liz Scherfius reports, both presidents issued important declarations.
Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos met with his Ecuadorian counterpart, President Rafael Correa, for the third binational cabinet meeting between the countries, following a border conflict in which Colombia bombed a FARC guerrilla camp in Ecuadorian territory in 2010, which killed 25 people. President Santos said that relations between the countries are positive today.
Yo podría decir sin duda.
I can say without a doubt, and I think all would agree, that relations between Ecuador and Colombia are the best they have been in their history.
Pasan por el mejor momento tal vez de su historia.
The fruits of some 40 bilateral meetings, which have occurred since the last binational meeting of November 2013, were discussed, focusing on 6 specific topics. Agenda items included infrastructure and connectivity, security and defense, border issues, commerce and the economy, as well as environmental and cultural concerns.
As governments, we have in our hands projects that represent the collective dreams of our people. For this reason, we should optimistically move forward with urgency to meet the goals we have set.
Para lograr las metas fijadas.
Development of the border region was a topic discussed by the presidents, as there are some 60,000 Colombian refugees currently in Ecuador. President Correa gave his support to President Santos's efforts to achieve a lasting peace in Colombia. Colombia is Ecuador's second largest trading partner after the United States, and the presidents presented the binational plan of border integration with objectives to be met by 2021. Liz Scherfius, Telesur, Ecuador.
Thanks to Liz. We turn to world news now. We go to Australia, where thousands have come together against Islamophobia following the death of 3 people during a hostage situation. With the hashtag I'll Ride With You, thousands have tweeted in support of Muslims living in the country. Celebrities have also joined the campaign, which seeks to reject and advance an Islamophobic response to the hostage situation. The hashtag has already garnered more than 120,000 tweets. And in Russia, the country's central bank has announced a new 17% interest rate hike. The move comes as the ruble fell for a 6th straight day on Tuesday. The country's economy is suffering as oil prices have dropped to $54 per barrel. Oil revenues account for over 15% of the Russian GDP. We end in Rome, where U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss a new Palestinian request for statehood. The request will be presented to the UN this week. Netanyahu has sought assurance from the United States that it will block the initiative using its veto power in the Security Council. While the U.S. still has not committed to blocking the statehood request, its 47-year record of backing Israel suggests that the request may indeed be stifled in the Security Council. More on those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle. Have a great day.